Right, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, as you know, was before the inquiry today, admitting he doesn't know who made the decision to hire private security guards, and he was similarly caught out on the issue of Defence Force personnel offered, as we know, in writing by the Prime Minister, requested by his own Commissioner, the Victoria's own Emergency Management Commissioner on one day and then rejected on the next. All the while, Health Minister Jenny Mikakis, she said yesterday she wasn't in charge of hotel quarantine. Well, today the Premier said in evidence that she, in fact, was.
You thought that it was DHHS and Minister Mikakis from the 8th of April onwards until the change away to the Department of Justice. That's your view?
Yes.
Well, someone who has followed every twist and turn in this very sorry saga is the Australian's Victorian state political reporter, Rachel Baxendale. She's been all over this today, and as we know, throughout the pandemic, she joins me now from Melbourne. Rachel, thank you for your time. I am mindful, and I'm telling this to my viewers too, a lot of evidence we heard today, a very comprehensive legal statement from the Premier, a lot of question and answer. It ran right through to 5 o'clock. But take us through where you think the biggest points of issue are.
It did. Look, I think the most interesting thing about Daniel Andrews, I've just written a very quick analysis piece for the paper that I think's just gone up online, and I think his performance today kind of goes a long way to explaining why he's managed to sort of really have very little mud stick to him despite scandal after scandal in his government. This is by far the worst scandal. 762 people have died. Our state economy's been crippled. We've been in lockdown will have been in lockdown for more than 3 months by the time we get out at the end of October, if indeed we do get out at the end of October. But Daniel Andrews is extremely good at coming across as being accountable and being contrite while blaming other people. And I think today he's sort of effectively thrown Jenny Mikakis, I think quite rightly, under the bus, and also to some degree thrown his departmental secretary, Chris Eccles, under the bus in saying that Chris Eccles should have passed on that email from his Canberra counterpart, Phil Gaetjens, about the fact that ADF troops were indeed offered. But he's managed to very carefully, claim that all of this was operational matters, that all happened at arm's length from him. It's a stinking mess. He's in charge, but if he's to be believed, none of it's his fault. He's not personally to blame for anything, but supposedly he's accountable.
Well, as someone who has sat in a leader's office for 6 years, opposition leader's office and a government Prime Minister's office, I don't buy any of it. I call it out as BS. The idea that the Prime Minister writes 3 letters in 1 week, even if Chris Eccles, his head of Premier and Cabinet, did not tell his boss that the offer was made and made repeatedly, which I do not believe. There are many occasions where Chris Eccles would have been in a room and briefing the Premier and he forgot to mention that. I don't believe it. But nonetheless, even if all of that happened, Rachel, even if we give him the benefit of the doubt, 3 letters from a Prime Minister to a Premier don't go missing. It's not a dog ate your homework sort of example here. We know that there are plenty of other circumstances, the Emergency Services Commissioner, ministers going under the bus, even the way he responded to questions, and I'll pick up that point you just made today about the style, the spin, sounding like he was being accountable, that he was taking responsibility, but on every point where he was asked, did you make this decision? Were you responsible? Were you advised? Did you know? No. But if you were watching at home and you weren't understanding all the intricacies of the last few months, he would have come across as reasonable. And this is why, Rachel, isn't it, that this guy in Victoria has been so hard to pin down because it's spin and style over substance and government implementation.
Absolutely it is. Look, he's been in charge of the biggest public policy disaster in the state's history, arguably. We've had he's basically agreed today that it's outrageous that we don't know who's responsible for this, and yet he's the bloke who's supposedly in charge, and somehow we're supposed to accept that it's reasonable, but he doesn't know how all of it happened, that he wasn't asking questions about how it all happened.
Just let me jump in there. I mean, if he was a company director with that sort of evidence in the federal court, he would likely have handcuffs as he's walked out there today, right? But because he's a politician and he has quite an extraordinary following, social media lynch mob, as you know, if you felt the full brunt of them behind him, there'll be a whole lot of Orwellian games over the next few days to try and move on from this issue.
Oh, absolutely, there will, and it was quite interesting this morning. We asked question after question. I think I counted it was about 20 variations on the same theme at the press conference this morning, trying to get him to answer questions about Jenny Mikakos's accountability, her claim that she didn't know about security guards being in hotel quarantine until some of them got coronavirus at the end of May, despite the fact that this was discussed in Labor caucus, much earlier in May, and despite the fact that she'd been at a press conference where it was discussed in April. And the Premier just, claimed that not only was it not apparently not appropriate for him to discuss these matters ahead of him appearing at the inquiry this afternoon, and we have to remember this isn't a criminal trial. This is a judicial inquiry. There's no prospect of a jury being prejudiced by him giving a direct answer to a few questions, at a press conference. But he's not only claiming that he can't give those answers, he couldn't give us those answers ahead of the inquiry this afternoon. He's claiming that he can't answer any questions until November when they hand down their report. And I think, very clearly he's hoping that by November, we might be out of lockdown. There might be a little bit less pressure. I don't think the families of the 762 people who've lost their lives so far, and the thousands of Victorians who will have lost businesses by then, and the tens of thousands of Victorians, if not hundreds of thousands of Victorians who will be out of a job still by then, will forget about it. But I think he is hoping that a little bit of the heat will have gone out of this by that time, and that somehow he'll get away with it.
Yeah, I do say, and I said tonight, that I don't see Daniel Andrews leading the Labor Party at the next election, and I think we'll go through that usual charade as sometime in January where he's had Christmas with his family and, the bushfires and COVID were tough on him, and he will now resign from public life, blah, 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 and they'll install another head. We've all seen that play out before. I want to go to the issue of Martin Pakula and the involvement of the unions. We know that Trades Hall were consulted by Martin Pakula. I think you might have even broken that story. We know that there was a $130 million taxpayer spend on these hotel quarantine contracts without a public tender, that the three companies who got the contracts were all represented by the same union that is linked back to Martin Pakula. This sort of stuff, it stinks to high heaven, Rachel.
Look, it does. And I guess I do have to say I didn't cover, I'm not across the evidence that Martin Pakula has given in the inquiry. I haven't covered that part of the inquiry. I've sort of been fronting up to ask Daniel Andrews questions every day and wasn't there for that bit. Look, absolutely, it's a concerning part of it. I think another aspect of things that was pretty interesting today is what role police might have played in this. We've sort of had a pretty strong indication that they didn't want to necessarily be part of this. And I think reading between the lines, it seems that they may have had some bearing on this. It's really not clear yet. It's going to be incredibly interesting to see what what the inquiry, what Judge Coate and what counsel assisting make of all this. And I hope that they do make some interim findings, pretty quickly, because it is going to be a long wait till November.
And just so I can be very clear too, it wasn't you, it was your colleagues at the Australian, Remy Varga, Ewan Hannon, 27th of August, confirmation that Martin Pakula did consult with Trades Hall, confirmation to the Australian. So there is that nexus there. Look, I've no doubt once there are transcripts out of the evidence today, people will go back through, and we have, hours and hours every week of the Premier fronting the podium and plenty of commentary from ministers to go and cross-reference everything we were told today. Of course, Jenny Mikakos has already been found out of misleading, I'll say that, misleading the Board of Inquiry yesterday. She disputes that. Her counsel disputes that tonight. But Rachel Baxendale, there'll be a lot to read from you in coming days. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peta.